You know who gets looked over a lot in history? White women. You bet you wasn't expecting me to say. This stitch is of a video I duetted earlier. Go back and watch the original video where you can watch my duet with book recommendations on it. Of the subject of white women and slavery, there's not as many books, but there are a few that are pretty good recommendations as far as reading. Many people know of Her Property, which is a very extensive look at it. I want to talk a little bit about this book. I want to say this about Her Property before I move forward. Her Property is free on Audible if you have an Audible membership. So if some of y'all have not read it and you're not planning on spending money for it, but you want to listen to it, it's free on Audible. Out of the House of Bondage actually just transformed my mindset in a way that I've never had it happen for the subject of white women and slavery. This is looking at the household of the plantation during slavery, but it connects through Jim Crow period. And it blew my mind. So it's talking about how the slave house or how a plantation household functioned with white women throughout the antebellum period. And in the duetted video, I give you the time frame of the antebellum period. It really starts after the last war with the UK for American independence, and that's the War of 1812. The War of 1812 ended on 1814. And that December of 1814, and the antebellum period in the South starts 1815. What is also very key, you have the abolitionist movement really happening during the same time frame. So during this historical period, depending on where you live, it's called something a little different. So during the same time period, from about 1780 until about 1865-ish, you have the abolitionist time frame and movement as well. So that's some history to keep you in mind. Back on this book, though, it really hit me differently. I've heard about the Jim Crow era. I've heard about Reconstruction. I know how Jim Crow flows into the 1960s, where we give credence to the civil rights movement, even though the civil rights movement had been happening decades, plural, prior to that. But for some odd reason, this book connected it for me. It talks about the transformation of the plantation house from its time period during slavery to Reconstruction, for that brief time period of Reconstruction, through Jim Crow. And it let me see that they had figured out how to keep our ancestors doing the jobs that they did. You had some outliers, of course. You had the Great Migration one and Part 2 happening. But I'll use my grandmother as an example. My grandmother was a house cleaner. She was a house cleaner and she worked in the field. And she did all kinds of odd jobs to make ends meet. Her mother before her was a house cleaner. And then her mother before her was a slave. And so it really hit me hard that they were able to extend. I like a term that another historian used, which is neo-slavery. They were able to extend slavery out really through Jim Crow by creating a form of neo-slavery where they were still working in the homes, taking care of the kids, getting paid pennies on the dollar versus getting paid zero. But it even goes through how some of the abuse was taking place during the antebellum period and even after the antebellum period. This book rocked my world as far as a mindset go. I read it almost 10 years ago. Next year should be 10 years, if not the year after. So I would say between 8 and 10 years ago, I read this book. It's in my collection. I've pulled it out periodically to refresh myself on some things just from my knowledge. But I think that it's not spoken of often, but it's a book you should know about.